a line of things that I own and said this will not be part of it. Or you can actually plainly agree that whatever I come with in this marriage is my property without even listing it, but what we are going to acquire from this day onwards is going to be jointly owned.
And you sign an affidavit?
An agreement.
An agreement?
Yeah.
And supposing there's no such agreement?
Supposing there is no such agreement, the law can actually, because the bill is saying you can have an express agreement or it can be implied
yes,
by the conduct of the parties. So if I come in, you say nothing, you take me to your mansion and show me around and say, darling, this is our home. I mean, by your conduct, by your conduct, you've indicated to me that that mansion
like farmland
is ours.
Right.
Yeah. So even if you agree, fine, but if you don't, it will be implied from the conduct of the parties.
So, of course, some people will ask, there's no video recording that I showed you this property in Makerere or whatever. How can you prove I showed it to you?
You know, for any legal contention that comes up in court, it is a question of fact and evidence that is going to be adduced in court.
So the woman has to make sure she has a camera with herself?
Not necessarily, because it is, in any case, it is your word against their word. But I mean, if I've lived there, you haven't even indicated that this is my house. Probably I've even been paying the electricity bills, and those are some of the things that the courts will look at and say, really, from all these facts, this was intended to be matrimonial property and not an individual's property.
Let's talk about a home, because what I know is that in the current law, a home where you live is a matrimonial home.
Yeah.
A man cannot sell it without talking to his wife.
Yes.
And the other properties that he rents out of commercial properties, he can't sell them because they're businesses. Supposing he's living in a home and he says, I'm actually paying rent. What happens, even though it's a matrimonial home? Can the woman not claim, saying this is actually a matrimonial home? It's not somebody else's.
If it's a matrimonial home, because a matrimonial home is actually, it can be presumed, but of course it can only be a matrimonial home if you've agreed that it is, or you have lived in it as if it was yours, provided it is not somebody else's property. If you're renting some house in Tinda which belongs to some other person, certainly that cannot be, because you're renting. The person who is the owner can decide to make you live.
Very briefly before we move forward, a man might come into a home. It's a large home, he doesn't want to share it, and he knows they're going to separate, so they move out of it, he rents it out, he rents a smaller room, then he says we don't have a matrimonial home. Is that something you provide for? Dodgy men.
That is something that is likely to happen and may happen. That's why the law is allowing an opportunity for you to agree and say this is how we are going to address this whole issue. Otherwise, it is presumed that when you get married, then the parties are under an obligation to be able to live in a home that is taken to be their matrimonial home, for the benefit of all the parties, including the children especially. All right,
then we'll talk about the grounds again. I'd like you to give us some more detail, but before we do that, can you give us about the sharing? How do you share these properties and the children? The man takes the boys, the wife takes the girls?
Not really, especially actually if we are talking about children. Then the law that governs children, this bill here is proposing how custody is supposed to be. Upon dissolution of marriage, custody issues are also determined. But the law that regulates children is the Children Act. And clearly, the guiding factors that the courts have to take into account in deciding who should have custody of children is the welfare principle. And that is that it has to be done in the best interest of the child. So, for instance, in many cases that have been decided by the courts of law, they normally look at who was the wrong party, who has caused the breakdown of this marriage, and what were the reasons for that breakdown, and then see who is the best suited parent of the two to take custody of the children. So if it is the mother who has been behaving in such a difficult way that it's been difficult for the marriage to continue, and it's also most likely to be difficult for the children to live in that situation, then the courts will decide otherwise.
Are the children asked as well?
Depending on the age of the children, among the issues that have to be taken into account is the what the children have to say about it, but this depends on the age. If they are 2 years or 3, they may not be in a position to say, I want to go with daddy or mommy. But if they are of an age where they understand, then they can have a choice, and their choice should be taken into consideration in deciding.
All right. Maybe before we hear from the listeners, Mr. Dan Ngabirano, talk to us a little bit more about the grounds for divorce. You mentioned some of them. Let's get them deeper a little bit.
Okay, so like I mentioned, under the new law, it's just one ground for divorce, meaning that if a party seeks to end the marriage or terminate the marriage, they just have to prove one ground. Irretrievable breakdown.
Go on.
And this, of course, is by way of evidence. So you have to prove irretrievable breakdown by affording court evidence of either that one of the parties has been adulterous, 2, sexual perversion, 3, cruelty, 4, desertion for at least 2 years without justifiable cause, change of religion, and this should be if the marriage was consecrated, say,
in a Catholic church.
In a Catholic church.
Now the man becomes a Muslim on a certain year.
Yes.
On a Friday afternoon.
Yes. So that's also a ground for divorce. Of course, incestuous adultery, incestuous defilement, sexual perversion, which again includes bestiality, sodomy, homosexuality, and pornography. But maybe before that, I need also to mention that under the new law now, you cannot petition for divorce until after a lapse of 2 years.
In the past, at the moment it's 6 months, isn't it?
No, what I mean is to petition court for divorce.
You must have been separated for 2 years.
You must have been in the marriage for 2 years.
Oh, you must have been in the marriage for 2 years?
Yes.
But I understand, I've not seen it in the law, but I'm told that if man and woman are wedded and they go home and they fail to complete the sexual act, then it's null and void. It's not a marriage after all.
Yes, then of course there's no issue of dissolution of the marriage. The marriage
never took place.
It never took place.
Let's get that. For a marriage to be valid, there must have been physical consummation.
Yes, absolutely. There must have been physical consummation, which is the sex act.
Right.
And if there's no such, it's just one of the grounds though. For example, if there are also other grounds which can render the marriage void, and that means that the marriage never existed.
Like if you discover that you are a relative or something like that?
Yes, that, and also if one of the parties was I don't know how to put this, but if one of the parties was I fail to get the word here.
Say it.
But say for example where I come to you and lie to you about certain facts, suppose you're a woman,
and then you discover something else.
Then you discover something else which is right to the marriage, then the marriage may be found void.
Like at what level?
Say
a woman has children, 7 children, she says nothing about them.
Say for example you're already married.
Yes.
You already constituted another marriage somewhere, and then you come to me and you say you're single, and then we go through this ceremony. So because of the first marriage, this other marriage is void.
It's void. It never really happened.
Yeah, it never.
How about adultery? How do you define it?
Adultery is definitely
when you're wedded in a Christian marriage, which is a monogamous marriage, and then a man finds a dimpled girl and then begins to date her. Can the woman divorce the husband on grounds of adultery? Is that adultery?
Yes, it's a ground for dissolution of the marriage. And put in simple terms, of course, adultery is having any sexual relationship outside the monogamous marriage. For the civil marriage, Christian marriage, which are monogamous marriages.
Right.
But the question of course, adultery does not arise
with Muslims.
Unless you and for the purpose of this law, with customary marriages.
Or even customary marriages?
Yes.
You can have up to 7?
Yes, depending on the customs, the rights and customs of the particular community.
Well, most of them are not written down. The current law, very briefly before we hear from the listeners, the current law says adultery is only a woman has the privilege. No, let me not use that word. Only a woman can commit adultery. Is that the case?
The current law?
Yes.
The current law was actually contested in a constitutional court, because the penal code provision was providing that only a married woman could commit adultery, so the man was free to go out with every other woman except a married woman.
Right.
That was the only time when it could be an offense. So that was contested in the Constitutional Court, and the Constitutional Court agreed with the petitioners that that was unconstitutional because it was discriminating women
against the woman
as against the men.
So right now, if you're a man, better stay married to one woman according to the law. Not me, I'm not preaching to you. Better stay married to the woman, because if the law gets you, you might pay 7 times, like they say. This is Spectrum. You can call it now, dear listeners. Our numbers 0414-348-111, 0312-260-390, 0312-261-390. When you call in, please tell us your name and where you are calling from. Spectrum, hello?
Spectrum, good evening.
Good evening, sir. Your name?
Yeah, my name is Jerry Vazali. Yeah, thanks very much for those 2 guests in the house. My issue is to do with relevance of this law to other people who are not urbanites. Urbanites are the people who live in the towns and who are literate and at least have access to the knowledge of the law. But this law appears to be tailored to meet the basic needs of the urbanites, and who in most cases have been out and have been out to break marriages and who have lost respect in the institution of marriage. You cannot tell me that someone in the rural areas of my place, Bosoga, can sit down before they start getting together circle things. They make a balance sheet of what have come with the assets and the liabilities. I don't think that one can really do. And it's very unfortunate. In the urban areas, the institution of marriage, I'll use the word, is going down the dog because we have brought in too much of the Western culture. The impact of the law, the laws they are trying to run here and there, have made this institution become very irrelevant.
Right.
This is really in opposition to what the church values hold in relation to marriage.
Right.
So I don't know how this law that they're trying to put in place can be married to meet the right church canon and what we expect, or what the church expects from us.
All right.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Balance sheet indeed, alongside maybe the wedding certificate. Spectrum, hello.
I'm Martin.
Yes.
Congratulations that we are about to have the first Nabiryo in Uganda. Maybe they said that its abbreviation is marriage and divorce. No? My question is, since the Constitution gives both a man and a woman equal rights at marriage, during marriage, and at divorce, is it possible for a woman in Uganda to marry a man and a Nabiryo? I'm Martin.
Spectrum, hello.
Good evening.
Good evening, sir. Your name?
I'm calling from Infat. I want to address Madam. I did Madam and my question is very.
Your line is not very clear.
There's a place where they say that what can they commit, and another issue when the court rules.
I'm sorry. Hello. Excuse me, we can hardly hear you. Can you get to a better location and call back? We'd like to hear those specific issues. Spectrum, hello. Hello.
Hello.
Yes, madam. Your name?
I'm called Grace. Together.
Yes, Grace.
Yes. I was asking. I'm sorry.
Please go on, Grace. Grace, have you?
No, I was requesting that man. Okay, that gentleman.
Yes.
So please highlight about. Okay, I just joined the debate and I really don't know what's going on.
Okay, what would you like him to highlight? Anyhow.
Hello?
Yes, madam, your name?
Hello?
Hello, your name?
Spectrum?
Yes, sir. Yes, madam. Yes, welcome to Spectrum. Your name?
Good evening, Edmund.
Good evening, madam. Your name?
And good evening, our guest speakers in the studio tonight. My name is Rita, and I'm calling from Chireka. Edmund, I'm glad that today we have different voices in the studio talking about the marriage and divorce bill. For a very long time, it's over 15 years, some of us have labored on this particular law. And I think it's high time Ugandans appreciated this law. As clearly stated by our speakers in the studio, this law is consolidating already existing laws that we already have in place with some new provisions that have been included. And I think it's also very important for our speakers to know the proposals in this law are based on a research that was done by an institution of government, the Uganda Law Reform Commission. So these are recommendations from a thorough study, it is not to benefit the elite women and men. It is to benefit the general population of Uganda. And I think if there's any law that has been subjected to consultation, it is this particular law. So really, guest speakers, thank you for the articulation, and I'm glad that a number of people are really voicing their ideas on this law. Thank you.
Rita, thank you for your contribution. Spectrum, hello? Okay, let's get back. Lydia, talk to us about, can a woman marry a man?
And I don't want to look at it in terms of can a woman marry a man, because if I'm looking at the institution of marriage, the Constitution is saying a man and a woman, as long as you are of adult age, you are above 18, you are free to agree and found a family.
Well, there must be leadership. Normally it's the man who asks the woman.
But you know, these days it's very clear that there have been even introductions which were normally handled at the woman's place that have been actually funded by the women. So if I'm interested in a marriage, the end justifies the means. If I have to foot the bill of the introduction ceremony to ensure that I go through a customary marriage, that's it. If I feel that I'm the one who is in a position to cater for all the bills for the church and the wedding, provided we agree with the man, we can still go through it. But what is important is that when we marry, it is a husband and a wife. How that starts is a different issue.
Let's get it clear. Does the current law prefer any advantages in the relationship to a man? Like kind of, well, they're equals, but primus inter pares, first among equals. Is there any primacy that goes to one party, the man, for instance?
Probably, if I'm to critically look at it, the only primacy would be that if I'm going to go to, if a man is going to go to a woman's place for an introduction, which is the first step to having a customary marriage, then the customs recognize marriage gifts,
yes,
which are taken by the man. But these marriage gifts are gifts as they are, meaning that
it's not an exchange.
It's not an exchange. And actually this bill is saying that if marriage gifts have been given as part of the marriage ceremony, then they cannot be demanded for. So you can't say, I gave you my cows, and
they give fridges. You can't claim it back.
Or fridges, you
can't say, I want that sofa. It still looks
exactly
nice.
So you cannot say that. So the law, this bill is saying, once you've given the gifts, they are really gifts, appreciating people who have raised a daughter that you have admired to take for a wife. So you should appreciate them from that day on. Even if your marriage somehow doesn't work out, you cannot come back and demand for them.
Sort of down the
because in any case, they will not be there.
Oh.
So if you demand for them, it's actually an offense under this bill.
Some of them might be a car free and so anyhow. Let's talk about, you said it's possible for a woman to marry a man. So it's possible for a man to actually have the introduction at his home and he receives gifts. His parents.
That's why we are saying that it depends on the customs of the community to which one of the parties belong. And normally in Uganda, most of the communities and the customs of Uganda demand that the customs of the woman is what we follow.
All right. Then let's hear from you, the listeners. Talk to us about what your reactions are.
So I'll talk about the relevance of the law. There's been a contention that's for the elite. But I would like to allay the listeners' fears that, on the contrary, I think the law to a great extent also reaches out to the persons that may not be here in Kampala, the women out there. Of course, there are some limitations here and there, but just to to highlight just a few highlights, which I think are very critical for the rural women, if I may say that. First of all, the bill outlaws widow inheritance, and we have
widow inheritance.
Yes. For example, among
if your brother's wife dies,
yes,
and you say, I always thought she was a good woman, let me take her for my wife.
Yes, so
that's not allowed.
Yeah, so you cannot marry her without her consent.
Right. In the past, men
course,
married.
yeah,
women.
in some cultures it was happening.
Right.
So I think to the extent that the bill outlaws that, I think it's relevant to the rural women because most times they're the ones who are, subject to this vice. But of course, there are also other implied benefits the bill that bestows on rural women. Say the issue of conjugal rights. It's a very contentious issue, but the bill attempts to limit conjugal rights under certain circumstances. Say where a woman has had a surgical operation or she's sick.
You cannot force her.
You cannot force her.
She's just given birth or something.
Yes,
like that.
you cannot force her. So I think these are more general provisions that you cannot say they're meant for the elite. But of course, again, when it comes to the issue of property is very contentious, given that where parties can agree before the marriage to divide their property and say, well, I intend to go into this marriage, but this property is independent property.
Right.
That's kind of unfair to the rural women because most of them may not be privileged to have property, and again, even during the course of the marriage, most of them provide services that cannot be quantified. So to that extent, I think the law is mild. I think the courts have been more progressive than the law in this respect because the very latest ruling from the court has actually held that once parties come together and under Christian marriage, they become one, and the question of what you came with to the marriage becomes relevant.
It becomes irrelevant.
It becomes irrelevant.
Right.
That's the Court of Appeal. So I think the law is a bit mild when it comes to property, but still I think to a great extent really it also uplifts the rights of women that are not elite.
And the balance sheet. What are we going to do about the balance sheet? You send the marriage certificate, you're supposed to have a schedule of things that you own as well.
Yeah, so like Lydia had pointed out, it need not be an express agreement. The agreement can actually be implied. So you don't need to sit down and do what you're proposing, the balance sheet. You can actually have this implied from your conduct. And in the event that you never sat down to write it down, then the cost will actually imply from your conduct.
All right. In 1965, Lydia, there was the so-called Kalema report. 65 is a long time ago, more than 40 years. What has been happening since that time? What did it say briefly? Let's look at where we're coming from.
That was an extensive research which was looking at marriage, appreciating the fact that the law that regulates marriage to this date is coming from our colonial masters. So provisions there relate to situations of more of an English setting that is not the African setting. So this research was looking at...
What's the difference between the European and African?
Oh, in Africa we live in communities, marriages are supported by relatives, clansmen, the henchmen, and yet with the Europeans it's me, a man and a woman, right. And probably a few. But here we are looking at a whole clan, and they get excited about their daughter who is going to marry, the grandmother comes and all that. So those are different settings. So this report was looking at a number of, it was a comprehensive research looking at marriage to see if we needed reform given the current situation, the Ugandan setting vis-a-vis the existing legal framework. And it actually recommended that we needed a reform in the laws of marriage. And that work is what was contributed to by the Uganda Law Reform Commission to continue doing extensive research, which research gave rise to having the Domestic Relations Bill. It didn't come out of some elite women or women lawyers for that matter, somewhere who got excited to say, I think we need this. But it was research from an institution which has the mandate to look at reforming the laws in this country to bring them to up-to-date measures, because society is not static, things change. So it's from that background, and actually all this bill has been subjected to a number of consultations with judges, with members of parliament, with civil society organizations, line ministries, to ensure that even religious leaders, to ensure that their issues of concern are taken into account. And actually this current bill as it is of 2009 takes into account account all the concerns of the different stakeholders.
2009, this is 2011. Why 2 years, if it's such a good thing?
Since 2009, it has been in Parliament. It was presented in Parliament for the first reading, and it went to the Committee of Legal and Parliamentary Affairs, which is scrutinizing and further taking into account stakeholders' views. And we also have been able to present our views on things that we think, as FIDA, on things that we think have to be changed before the bill is actually passed into an act of Parliament. Because this is the opportunity that stakeholders have before it comes into an act of Parliament to bring in their views, so that they are consolidated in the bill, and when it's passed as an act of Parliament, all their concerns have been taken into account.
So you are finally happy with it, women lawyers? You think it's a good thing?
We still have some areas,
which areas?
Of advocacy that we are going to be addressing.
Talk to us about those very briefly. Maybe next time, since we're meeting again on Wednesday. All right. Well, I must thank you very much indeed, dear guests. Mr. Dan Ngabirano, lecturer of family law at Makerere University, also a partner at the Development Law Associates. Thank you for coming to Spectrum.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Miss Lydia Nabiryo, board member at FIDA-Uganda. Thank you for coming to Spectrum.
You're welcome, and thanks for listening to us.
Right, and like I said, we'll have 3 sessions of this every Wednesday. Next Wednesday we'll talk about this, and then the Wednesday after. So do stay tuned. Thank you for tuning in. I've been your host, Edmond Chisdo. Up next is the news in English. Otherwise, have a very good evening.